Hello ladies and gents, and welcome to the Chi Naija Sewing Space, where you learn to and style the wardrobe of your dreams. Well, I'd like to say I'm an old pro at this sewing thing. I think I've been sewing for like 8-9 years now. We're edging onto the 10-year mark, and in between that time there was a time where I actually stopped for 9 months. Don't worry if you just started. This is quite normal. When the actual context of what it is to sew hits you, you're like, for a while you're like, no, I don't think this is for me. But if you truly love sewing, which I think is the reason why you clicked on this video, you press on after the small hiatus. And which brings me to this video, which is things that I just wish, someone sat me down and told me before I started this whole sewing thing. And so I have my notes on my phone here, so I will talk you guys through the points, and hopefully this informs you a little bit. I mean, back when I started, I don't think there were videos like this. There wasn't me on the YouTubes and the internet telling people this. So let's start off. Okay. Now, the first thing I wish I knew when I started sewing was that preparations before you actually start sewing, things like cutting, pattern drafting, little intricate details of the design of what you're trying to sew. I mean, this is even when it comes to just like sewing like a regular old pillowcase, like, do you put zips? Is it going to be like envelope style pillowcase, which I have a tutorial on that on the channel. I'll link it in the cards. What type of zip is it going to be? An exposed zip, invisible zip? All those kind of details actually take a longer time than the actual putting the fabric or the garments in the sewing machine and sewing. Let me tell you, like, that takes even more time, because you need to cut your fabric, make sure you're cutting properly, measure twice, cut once. During that cutting process, you're gonna make mistakes. So yeah, right. But ironically, that's like my favorite part of sewing right now, that whole intricate detail before you get to that part. Okay. Second thing I wish I knew before I started sewing is that you have to be frank with yourself about your body measurements. You have to accept them, embrace them. Sewing is the real body positivity movement. It's like the OG, because especially if you're making things for yourself, if you in your head wish that you had a 28-inch waist and you measure and you deceive yourself and tell yourself you have a 28-inch waist, meanwhile you have a 36-inch waist, guess what? When you sew, nothing, and I promise you, nothing is going to fit, and everything is going to be uncomfortably snug. You're going to hate everything you sew, which is why we sew, really. You sew so that you can have things that fit your body right, that don't make you feel bad about your body. You could be a 30-inch, 36-inch waist and still have things skim your body nicely and make you look beautiful. We're all beautiful. Okay. The third thing I wish I knew before I started sewing was that little measurements matter. And in fact, understanding the measurements, especially if you're like in Nigeria here, we use inches. There's 1/8 of an inch, 3/16, 5/8. You have to understand these measurements on your tape ruler. I'll actually link a video that helped me on this. I'll link it down in the description box. People, go down there and check, because I know you guys don't go down there and check anything. But for this video, for this tip, go down there and check. I'll link a video to a lady that explained everything for me, and that video really helped me out in my journey. Okay, but those measurements, every like 1/4 of an inch matters in sewing. And you have to understand your tape measure. In fact, understand your tape measure. That should actually be the tip now. Okay? Now, the fourth tip I wish I knew before I started sewing is that 30 minutes of sewing every day is enough to get things done. you know, because the idea I had of sewing, and I think it's something that scares a lot of people away from sewing. They feel like you need hours upon hours in the day to sew. This is just not true. You're not, especially if you're sewing for yourself, you know, you're just sewing one or two things here or there. If sewing is your business, then of course you need hours and hours and hours. Like, I mean, like if you had a 9 to 5 job, you'd be there 9 to 5. If you were sewing, you'd be sewing for 9 to 5. And in fact, if you're sewing, it's more than 9 to 5. It's a 24-hour job. But even then, I'm sure you had people helping you out and stuff like that. But yeah, if you're just like a home sewist like I am, maybe you sew 1 or 2 projects for family members here or there, 30 minutes every day, you know, like it's okay to get things done. And I also talk about this in my video for my hacks for sewing efficiency. I'll link that in the cards for you guys, so that you have the advanced knowledge or the inside scoop of what it is to start sewing. Then you can improve on your sewing and get more efficient by watching that video. The 5th sewing hack that I wish I knew before I started sewing is that you actually need space to sew. And I also talk about this in my sewing efficiency video. Like, you need space. People think it's just, oh, anywhere your sewing machine stays, that little corner of the sewing machine is where you know you need space to actually cut your fabric. So most beginning sewists usually commandeer the dining table. You know, you can have then later on you can advance to having a sewing room. But right now, I just have a small sewing corner. There's also a video about that in the on the channel. I'll link it down in the description. You see how I organize everything. But yeah, even if it's just the dining table, okay, you need to have enough space to sew and cut and measure. In fact, measure and cut out your fabrics. Like, the 6th thing I wish I knew before I started sewing is that you need to treat fabrics before you start sewing. You need to wash them before you start sewing, because the most annoying thing is when you have spent time and energy and love sewing up something, then you throw it in the wash and everything runs, or you throw it in the wash and the things shrink. Especially things like denim, you know, like my denim, I don't even play. Into the wash you go. And sometimes, you know, like you see a fabric is all shiny and nice, you know, you wash it, then it fades on you and stuff like that. Or maybe like the starch that they used to get the fabric to stand washes away, and like you don't even want to use the fabric anymore to sew. And it happens so often, you'd be surprised. Now, the 7th thing I wish I knew before I started sewing was that your needles matter. You know, like in this whole sewing game, you know, there's some gimmicky products. I'll admit to that. You know, some gimmicky things that you don't really need, but your needle matters. There are needles for sewing knits, there are needles for sewing woven fabrics, okay, there are needles for top stitching, there are needles for doing felt, there are needles for doing embroidery. These things matter, trust me, because if you use like a ballpoint needle, no, if you use like a sharp needle to sew a stretch fabric, which you should be using a ballpoint needle, you'll have skip stitches, your thread is gonna break. It is without a doubt the most annoying thing. Okay, so invest in good quality, you know, different variety of needles for different projects. Even if you haven't started sewing, you know, these particular kinds of with these particular kinds of fabric, it doesn't matter. Just have them in your arsenal, you know, so that when the time comes, you have your needle to sew with, and it just makes sewing a breeze. Number 8 is actually the thing that took me the longest to understand and get in my head about sewing. This took me years to learn. I'm telling you now, so it won't take you as long, okay? Different types of fabrics give you different types of outcomes for even like the same sewing pattern, okay? Let me explain. Okay, if you use, say, this Ankara fabric right here, which there is a sewing tutorial for this particular Ankara dress. It's an A-line dress, and I show you how to sew these fabulous sleeves. Okay, but back to what I was saying. If you use an Ankara fabric, stiff Ankara fabric, to sew this A-line dress, it's gonna come out like this, you know, like not so close to the body, standing out of the body, you know. But people, if you use a knit fabric, especially like a slinky kind of knit fabric, to sew this same dress with this same style, with this same measurement, totally different outcomes, guys. Like, I know I seem to be dragging this on, but I have to say this because this took me a long time to understand. If you even use something as simple as a crepe de chine, you know, different outcomes for this same pattern. Okay? So your fabric choices matter a whole lot. When you, I mean, like, I used to go into the shops, just pick up any fabric I see, and I'll be like, oh, match this pattern, and I'll sew it, and it wouldn't come out the way I wanted in my head. And for the longest time I kept on thinking, why is this happening? Why is this happening? This is why. Okay? All right. I hope I've made this clear now. Okay. The ninth thing I wish I knew before I started sewing is that there is such a thing as a sewing sequence. Okay, and if you're used to sewing with commercial patterns, this wouldn't be like a new thing to you. But if you're a pattern draft for yourself, this is a big deal. You know, like, you always think, oh, sew the zip first, sew the lining first. No, the design you're trying to sew matters, because if the design you're going to make is going to have different things, like a sleeve or this or that, or even if you want like an all-in-one lining, or you don't want a lining, that matters as to the sequence you're going to use to sew that project. You know, if you're going to sew the sleeves first, or the skirt first, or the pleats first, you know, or the zip last, or, you know, it does matter. So this is part of the preparation for sewing. You know, I actually go down and mark, you know, like, visualize what I'm going to sew and mark down the sequence, you know. But if you're sewing with a commercial pattern, someone else, some nice kind person has already figured this out for you, and they give you the sewing sequence in the instructions for the patterns. And sometimes, like, some sewing patterns have video tutorials that go along with that, and it's in there as well. Okay? All right. Now, the 10th thing I just wish someone told me before I started sewing is that your seam ripper is going to be your best friend, because I don't care how long you've been sewing, 100 years, 10 years, 2 months, 1 hour, you're going to make mistakes, and annoying mistakes at that, rookie mistakes at that. So you're going to unpick, you're going to rip, you're going to be frustrated and drop something down, only to come back and have to unpick that particular mistake that you made. So this is one of the things that sewing teaches you. I think I actually have a blog post where I talk about the things that sewing teaches you. I'll link that also in the description. Go there right now and check it out. Okay? So yeah, sewing teaches you to, you know, embrace the mistakes and just, you know, look at them, shake your head, and keep on pressing on. Another thing that you're going to have to contend with when you're learning to sew, this is the 11th thing. You are going to become best friends with your iron. And take this from someone who hates ironing, hated ironing even more before I started sewing. You sew a seam, you iron, so that your your fabrics or your creations come out looking all nice and crisp and very haute couture, you know, like out of the box, you know, like store made, not homemade, you know, you need to press everything out. And also, like when your fabric, if your fabric rumples before you even cut into it, or you'll be surprised how a little rumple can translate into 2 inches. Yes, ladies and gents, like a little crease in your fabric that you thought, oh no, that doesn't, no, that's 2 inches added to your measurements. And next thing you're trying to sew and you're wondering, oh, how did this fabric grow? How did this grow on me? Okay, so you sew a seam, you press, and trust me, do that. Just do it, trust me. And finally, our last tip, this should go without saying. I mean, this is general in life, but for some reason, when you start learning how to sew, it skips your mind. You're like, you're in awe of your new superpower to change, you know, flat fabric into this beautiful 3D creations. But friends, you're at least gonna be sewing for 3 years before you become pro. And by pro, I don't even mean like haute couture level. I mean like where you can sit down and sew a full garment confidently without the worst mistakes ever. Like just to sew a garment without calling someone in despair and like, oh, in fear, like, oh, did I sew this, did I not sew this, or having to run to the next YouTube video. I'm like, oh, how to do this, how to do that. Like, trust me, at least 3 years before your garments start, you know, like your garments from your head start making it into your finished product. Okay, and I don't know why this should be strange to anyone. You need time and hours in to be good at anything in life. Okay, all right then, that is the end of this video. Thank you for making it to the end. Check out my other content and I'll see you there. And if you're new here or if you're just returning, keep sewing and subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next video.